think PlayStation's former boss, Sean Layden, may have argued himself into a corner with his statements that he made about Game Pass. I told y'all that right now there's going to be a lot of scrutiny as to what is being said in the gaming industry because we have execs across the board now giving a lot of information. In fact, if you think about what's been said about Game Pass from, say, a few years back, you can probably piece together some of the deals that the service actually carries out with different developers across the board. For instance, if you kind of take a look at maybe some of the Game Pass deals that we've actually heard of, you see some like GTA 5 on Game Pass, which a leak showed that Microsoft paid Take-Two Interactive, or basically Microsoft noted that they would expect Take-Two Interactive to ask for around $12 to $15 million a month for the game to be on Game Pass for approximately 30 million hours of time played. Then in another particular, analyst's conclusion, we also got to see that Microsoft probably paid about $5 to $10 million for Marvel Guardians of the Galaxy to come on Game Pass. This is after the game had already launched. These two games, you can already see that in this case, Microsoft was stipulating how much they thought it was going to cost them to bring GTA 5 to Game Pass. And then in this case, analysts are talking about how much they thought that it would cost for Xbox to bring Guardians of the Galaxy to Game Pass. So Game Pass has a lot of different options for developers as a whole in that regard. We also have seen some deals where the game launches on Game Pass as well. Now, in that case, we don't know exactly what every game does, but we've heard about Xbox executives, I think even Phil Spencer himself, talking about how they work with different developers on different circumstances. It's a kind of a case-by-case basis thing. But Sean Layden said something very interesting, and I wanted to go ahead and kind of walk through how the math is going to be, assessed in this regard. He said something about, one thing about the whole Game Pass thing is that the house always wins. Basically, he said that the devs themselves usually don't get, a big benefit from Game Pass itself. And I wondered, how did he come about that math? Because in one case, he said, one of the things that Game Pass would do is that it will pay wages. That's basically development cost to the developers, right? So it pays wages, but that's not really a big deal because some developers, they want to shoot for the moon. They want something higher at the end of the day. But if you were thinking about it, whenever, say, a game is developed, it would have to include costs such as wages, which would be development cost. It would probably also need maybe marketing cost, right? This is basically the amount of money that they spend to market the game, right? So what the developer or the publisher is hoping is that when they go to market, that they will make enough money to cover wages and their marketing cost and then have excess dollars, which would then be profit. Now, if you get a deal that actually covers your wages and then your sales, which basically something that you have to pretty much do or you get access to if you're making your game and putting it on Game Pass, would that not mean that you have a higher probability of making more money, seeing as your wages have either been covered or subsidized if you take on a Game Pass deal? So I was kind of surprised when he said that yesterday because I was thinking to myself, well, if he's talking about wages, that really does make sense. And then he said developers prefer profit sharing or overages and so on and so forth. Well, I don't know how else to put it. So-called overages and profit sharing and all of the above still find themselves in the category of basically wanting to make enough dollars to cover those two pieces, which would include your wages, and in this case, we'll call them wages slash dev cost and marketing, right? So even though Xbox says to you, okay, we want to give you a profit share, you still need to take that so-called profit share, let's say it's in this corner, to still then go back and find a way to make sure that it, in a sense, wipes out or replaces or replenishes the wages that you have spent in developing the game and possibly the marketing that you've done. It is all a piece of you getting money to basically go back and recuperate your costs at the end of the day. So I was quite surprised when he was talking about this because I was saying this doesn't make sense to me. There's something that Warren Buffett said. Warren Buffett said if the deal doesn't make sense on the back of an envelope, then it's not really a deal worth pursuing. So I took an envelope, which is basically my little makeshift photo editing software here, and I took a paintbrush and I started kind of, wanting to write it out, and said to myself, okay, how don't we do one like Marvel Guardians of the Galaxy? Now, Marvel Guardians of the Galaxy, its sales were not necessarily the greatest sales. We know that. We got to see how a game that was actually, in my opinion, somewhat of a quality game, if you ask me. I mean, I've been playing it here and there, haven't beaten it. There were some things about the game that kind of made me go, all right, you all need to shut up and just fight. But that's a different story. The game already came out, right? It already sold, and after its wages, basically its development cost, and then its marketing cost, right? In this case, oof. And if it's basically an expensive Marvel game, it would then have licensing fees attached to it as well. Yikes. I hope I'm spelling license very well. I don't want to embarrass myself here on Facebook, on YouTube. And so now their sales would then have to make money to cover all of these costs. Well, after all was said and done, maybe their sales, covered, say, wages, maybe it covered market, and then license started to hit them, just like all these Marvel games do, including even Marvel Rivals, where the developers basically, laid off they basically let go of a support team. So licensing basically can get very expensive. The Indiana Jones game is going to get its license fees subsidized by PlayStation fans. That's the joke I've been making inside. Well, then Microsoft comes in, and maybe the licensing fees are still a thing, and says, hey, Square Enix, why don't you bring this game to Game Pass, and we're going to give you a fee over here. And then you can then take that fee, and you can pretty much go ahead and subsidize these costs and potentially still keep more money in your coffers. And Square Enix obliges. They take that game, it sends it to Game Pass, and then while they're in Game Pass, believe it or not, people can still continue to buy the game, which then still keeps bringing in more money to the publisher as well. This is something that whenever the people who are talking about this Game Pass thing never really want you to talk about, or never want to go ahead and acknowledge. Because in their minds, they think, oh, the moment the game goes to Game Pass, no one's going to buy it, everybody's going to be renting it, and then that's the end of it. But some people play the game and they make progress on the game, and eventually they want to go ahead and own the game. What do? They find themselves in a situation where buying the game makes more sense for them. For instance, Nier Automata. If you look at my version here on PC, I already started playing the game. When the game went on sale, it went on sale across the board, and I wanted to have a Steam version of the game. So what I do? I went to Steam and I went and bought the game because I hadn't played too far in, and I'm glad I did because it's one of my most played games on my Steam Deck, of which I've played more hours than I did on Xbox. Do you think Platinum Games and Square Enix is mad that I bought it on Steam over the Xbox ecosystem? I'm sure that they were happy to take the money regardless of where the money came in from, whether it be a green check or a blue check. But this is how Game Pass goes. Another game was Sifu. It came on Game Pass after spending years as an exclusive, in a sense, on Epic Games. And so when the game landed, I was like, man, this game is actually a lot of fun. I played for a very small amount of time. Then I decided I was going to go ahead and buy a copy on Steam because I wanted to maybe play it on my Steam Deck, of which I've played a little bit more split ways. The whole conversation about how this thing doesn't work for developers, I just strongly don't believe it. Okay? I mean, that's the nicest way I can say that these folk are clearly trying to put wool over our eyes. Because again, when I run the numbers and I do a back of envelope crap nonsense caricature thing, it makes sense for the developers to say, hey, how do we go out there and get more money? And what's funny is it's the older games that are the majority of games on Game Pass. So these developers have already basically made sales, possibly covered their wages, their marketing costs, perhaps license fees, perhaps even, fees that they may have across the studio and publishers and whatnot. And all Game Pass is for many of them is simply just extra revenue that they can pretty much keep making or earning, and only for a specific period of time. Their games don't stay on Game Pass forever. Why are people just basically pretending as if Game Pass is this crazy thing that's going to ruin their lives? In fact, so many people just have a hatred for the fact that it exists, when this is an industry practice that has been here for a long time, just not at this scale just yet. And the very first one that brings in the scale in a saturated market is basically evil for a lot of these folk. Even some executives. Do y'all not remember that all these big executives are going out there saying, they don't see it as it's feasible, blah, blah, blah. They don't think it makes any sense. Yet, many of the other big companies and big publishers are putting their games on Game Pass. If you want to figure out, look at Capcom. Capcom will bring out its game, it will launch it, it will sell copies, it will make that bread up front, and then when it's all good and ready, it eventually goes in and starts to finally, when it's getting that drip, drip, drip money, it wants to increase the flow of it, and it makes its way to Game Pass. For some strange reason, a lot of people are just burying their heads in the sand and pretend like they don't really know what's going on, when in reality they actually do. But again, like I said, it's imperative that we continue to talk about this stuff because, believe you me, people are going to run wild if you leave them alone. They're going to mislead other people. That's what I think is trying to be done here. This is just misleading people. No one's even saying go get a Game Pass subscription. I don't care. I couldn't be bothered. But at least know what the reality is and the conversations being had. So, again, if it doesn't make sense on the back of an envelope, then it's not a deal worth pursuing. But these developers, they look at it and man, they are losing their minds because the games that are showing up on Game Pass from both big, small, tiny publishers as well is just insane. Talk to me in the comment section. Thanks for watching the video. Peace out.